Welcome to the teen and young adult edition of the Dr. Helen Kest Show, a resourceful, educational, and inspiring talk format for teenagers and young adults everywhere. The teen and young adult edition of the Dr. Helen Kest Show is guest hosted by Joshua Kest. Young people face many challenges and have many questions, but the teen and young adult edition of the Dr. Helen Kest Show is here to speak to the hearts and minds of young people everywhere. And now, your host, Joshua Kest.
Hello, ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, grandparents, regular listeners, and those who may have just stumbled upon this show. Welcome. You are listening to the Dr. Helen Kest Show. My name is Joshua Kest, son of Dr. Helen Kest and Rutgers University student, and today I'll be sitting in for your host, Dr. Helen Kest. In today's show, I plan on discussing and perhaps tackling a problem that really affects many of my fellow teenagers out there. I really stress the fact that it deeply affects teenagers because we are in that transitional phase and in pursuit of transcending into adulthood. In truth, though, this topic is something that everybody listening can relate to and involves habits that should be learned and fixed before one becomes older and develops really bad habits. What is this topic, you may ask? It is none other than time management. Today, we will go over what time management is, time management's importance, how we can better manage our time, and look at what God says about it. And we will be right back.
You're listening to the teen and young adult edition of the Dr. Helen Kest Show. For questions, comments, or prayer, visit helenkest.org. That's HELENKEST.org. Again, that's HELENKEST.org. And be sure to click on the contact link. And now, your host, Joshua Kest.
Today we are talking about the ever so important concept that some excel at and others really struggle with. What is that? That is time management. Before we can begin our discussion on this concept of time management, I believe it would be appropriate to define what time management is. What is the first thing you thought about when I mentioned today's topic? It probably had something to do with juggling many events and activities around, or multitasking, or prioritizing. For example, when I mentioned time management, some may have thought of a classic scenario involving a young school child. This school child has a favorite show which comes on at 8 o'clock at night. However, this school child is in school and school finishes at 3 o'clock. Mind you, this child also has a lot of homework. In this sort of situation where this child has a battle between being able to watch a show at 8 o'clock, getting out from school at 3 o'clock, and having a lot of homework which will take up most of his time, he has a couple options. One option is he can just decide to skip the show and hope for a rerun sometime along the line. Second option is he could watch the show and do his homework at the same time. The third option is he could just decide to watch the show and not do the homework at all. Each of these choices have consequences and each has benefits and cons. Well, just remember this example because we will come back to this example later in the show. But this example and each of the things I mentioned earlier, such as multitasking and prioritizing and juggling activities, each have a correlation with time management. Okay, so to go deeper into time management, let's first look at the two words that make up time management independently: time and management. According to the dictionary, time is defined as an indefinite and continuous duration regarded as that in which events succeed one another. That is basically a lot of English for time being something that is always occurring, that is in a constant continuum. For example, even you listening to the show right now and me, your host speaking, has an element of time in it. And you are devoting yourself to listening to me in this instant rather than engaging in another event. The other word is management. Management is defined as the act or manner of managing. Managing being to take care of or to take charge of something. Usually, management has a sense of accomplishment in it. When you manage something, you handle, you give direction to, you control something. And usually, when you think of management, you don't think of something that can easily be done. Management is usually hard and requires executive ability. Management is a big deal. And that's why, if you think about it, people like to put those who are very qualified into management positions because it is a big deal. When talking about managing, I think it's easier to think of baseball or soccer managers because they provide a really rudimentary example of what managing really entails. These managers, they prepare long and hard before games. They create game plans to use before the games. Then, during the game is when they really make their money, because during the game, they have to do a crucial part of their job, which is to improvise. If their plans go awry or something wrong happens, they immediately have to find solutions and change it. And a good mark of a manager is if that change he has made has positively affected the outcome in the game. So, by putting the two definitions together, we can see what time management essentially entails. Time management is essentially a means by which someone exercises control over how they decide to use the precious resource called time, and if their use of time leads to a positive outcome, which should be the ultimate goal. It includes allocations and big decisions as well as sacrifices. When we return, we will focus on why time management is so important. We will be right back.
You're listening to the Teen and Young Adult edition of the Dr. Helen Kest Show. For questions, comments, or prayer, visit helenkest.org. That's HELENKEST.org. Again, that's HELENKEST.org. If you would like to make a donation or become a partner, be sure to click on the partner link. And now, your host, Joshua Kest.
Before the break, we defined time management and reached the conclusion that time management is basically defined by the way one exercises control over how they decide to use this precious resource called time. And a good mark of good time management is if their use of time leads to a positive outcome in their life. Now, we are going to focus on why it's so important, why time management is so important. For this part of the show, I'm going to be talking about my personal experience. From my personal experience and from what I know, good time management can really be a difference maker. I personally experienced this during my first year in college. When I was making the transition into college, I had no idea of the role time management would eventually play. In high school, I would be in a classroom from about 8 o'clock a.m. to 3 p.m. every day for about 5 days a week, so about 7 hours a week times 5. So I was putting about 35 hours a week in school, not including the time outside of school I had to do other things such as homework, other assignments, and everything. When I got to college, the first thing I noticed was that in my first semester, I was in class for about half of the time that I was in high school each week. Plus, some classes were even optional, meaning I didn't even have to go to them. Before, when I was in high school, my time was mostly dictated. But in college, this same principle of dictation did not hold true. It was up to me to decide to attend class or put in extra time to study. Because I did not time manage in my first semester, I thought I had all the time in the world. And what I do with all this time in the world that I believed I had? I wasted most of it doing nothing truly productive, which is something I regretted. Now, this wasn't just a problem I was having personally, but it was also a problem I saw many college students have, regardless of where they went to college. I did not utilize my time correctly, and it really cost me from achieving a personal goal which I had set for myself entering that semester, and that goal was a perfect GPA. So I knew I had to do something about this. So during the break from my first semester to the second semester of my freshman year, I came up with a game plan. I came up with a schedule for my classes, a schedule for studying, a schedule for leisure activities, and I followed through with it. Along with creating a schedule, I had to make some tough choices. For example, I decided to overload my schedule with over 21 credits so that I was in school for more time. I made myself do longer hours in the library studying. I had to cut back on some clubs I was in, and I also had to prioritize club activities, as well as cutting down on some of the excessive leisure time I had playing basketball and doing other things. And what happens after all these sacrifices and this plan I made? Well, I got the perfect GPA in the second semester, which I've been looking for, and I haven't looked back since. So the purpose of this real-life example was mainly to prove a point to you. Time management is important because it helps you realize and attain your goals. So how does it do that? Well, I've come up with a few ways time management really helps you do this. One is that time managing really makes you more efficient. Efficient meaning it helps you perform with the least amount of time and effort wasted, and also makes you more productive, meaning it'll help you generate results. To summarize this first point, it gives you more bang for your buck. 2, I also had to realize a few things. One of the things I realized was that I wasted way too much time. Earlier in the show, I mentioned that time was a precious resource. To put into context, think of this. If you were given gold, wouldn't you try to make that gold profitable to yourself by some way? Yes, you would. You would either try holding it and waiting for gold prices to go up so that you can sell it, or investing it, or looking for any other way to make it really profitable to you. Well, the same way that you would try making gold profitable is the same way you should look at time. Time should be treated the same way. Time, it is very limited. In fact, time wasted cannot be gained back. So remember, try making your time profitable. Another thing I realized was that I really enjoyed procrastinating and complaining. Those two together are not a very good combination. This was really bad and unnecessary on my part because all this does, and all this did for me, was put me under unwanted stress. And it did not get, and whenever you're under this unwanted stress and duress, your optimal output can never be guaranteed.